everyone, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
And welcome to our latest TV show we found streaming that we want to talk about. Limited series, I guess this is. And so for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about the Netflix original limited series, Unorthodox, which is based off of the memoir of Deborah Feldman and writing about her journey to leave a ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jewish community in Williamsburg, New York, in Brooklyn. It is, I found out, there's the 4 parts on Netflix, and then there's a tiny little making of documentary, which answered some of the questions I was going to ask. So it's the Satmar Hassidic community in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, and they're almost entirely started by Holocaust survivors who emigrated from Satmar in Hungary. And boy, is it an interesting religious community that I have a lot of questions about, and I know so did Dr. Kristen, and we loved the show, and we're real excited to talk about religion and gender, as you guys can imagine. So my first question, I'm looking at my notes. Unorthodox, part 1. What is that piece of wood they kiss? In doorways? ?
So that is a mezuzah.
Yep.
It is a piece of wood that contains a piece of the Torah, usually some very specific verses from Deuteronomy, which is, it comes from a verse in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 9, that says, "Put the word of God on your door frames." And they take it very literal. The mezuzah is part of nearly every sect of Judaism I am aware of.
Okay.
And there are many evangelical Christians that I know that also have mezuzahs in their home. And the idea of just kind of like always paying attention to the word of God and always being aware that it is in a certain way like a foundation. Like the door frame is the most stable part of your house.
Right.
And so that is where you would put this thing that is the basis of your stability.
I see. That's so interesting. And that was the other thing that was like, as you watch this first episode, and it goes back and forth between, we find out really early on that Esty is attempting to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a thing I didn't understand about like why she couldn't leave like the house on the day that she was supposed to. And she's talking to the women in their community. So lots of things I didn't necessarily get right away. And they jump back and forth between her life in Williamsburg and her escape to Berlin. But it's fascinating to me that they chose Berlin as the place that she went to, and it has this whole relationship with obviously the Holocaust and the treatment of Jews, and not like the epicenter of Nazi Germany.
But she chose Berlin. Like it isn't, the show didn't choose it. Like she chose Berlin.
She chose Berlin. Yeah. And I'm trying to, do we find out in this part why she chose Berlin?
No, what we do find out in this part is that her mother, with whom
mother is in Berlin, that's right.
Tempestuous relationship.
Yeah.
That Esty is eligible for German citizenship because her mother's parents were born in Germany.
Yeah, so that's probably why she chose Berlin.
As marked as Nazi identification cards, we do see in this part as well.
Yeah. So there's a lot of layers happening early on in the show with religiosity and gender and identity and trauma all at once. We find out our Esty is pregnant, and then her family finds out that she's gone, and then they decide to send Moishe, who Moishe also has a complicated history with the community. And the rabbi like kind of bribes him, like, I will put you in good standing with you know, I'll fix your relationship with your family. I'll get your family back. I'll put you in good standing with God if you go to Berlin and bring her back.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, bribery, but apparently it works for Moishe, who then has to take Esty's husband, Yankee, who is
a little bean of a human, like just a puppy. Like, God love him.
He's just a puppy. God
He's
love
so
him.
earnest. He's trying to love her and doesn't know how. Like, oh.
He wants to, and I think that's so clear early on. Like, he wants to, and I think he's a good person.
Yep.
He just has no idea how to be in a relationship and how to help her.
Not that he's ever been taught.
Not that he's ever been taught. Yeah. He's such an empathetic figure for me this whole time. I never really see it as like, you know, I don't think they have a great relationship, but I never really see him as like a bad guy that she had to run away from. And I don't think she was running away from Yankee at all, as much as the community that she felt she didn't have any part of. But she goes to Berlin and she finds some friends from a coffee shop, including Hot Robert. We're going to call him Hot Robert because
he is hot and his name is Robert. It works very well.
We're stating facts, and it's a pandemic. But yeah, the scene at the lake, I think, was probably the most remarkable scene in this part, where they go to the lake she goes to the lake with her new German friends that she met that day when she lands in Berlin. Which those of you, like, you might watch it and go, life doesn't really happen that way. It does sometimes in Europe.
It does.
Especially with young people and, you know, kind of the internationalization of Berlin these days. I was not at all surprised that they were all so welcoming and they were like, sure, come to the beach.
Come on in. Yeah, I've definitely had life experiences like that in Europe. Yeah. So.
This is the Euro rail.
Like less so in America, but definitely the like, oh sure, come on, stranger, what's your name again? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Where in America, like, I would have never done that. I would have been like so afraid that they wouldn't have been good people. And I found myself like really, I was like, oh, are they nice people? Are they going to do something to her? No, they're just friendly. They're just friendly.
Humans are good humans. Yeah.
Yeah. But they get to the lake and Robert, we discover in a hilarious conversation in the car where they're talking about the trauma of memorial sites all over Berlin, and where all these young people are from, very diverse group from all over the world. But one young woman, Yael, is from Israel, and they're talking about, but Robert's the only one born in Berlin, and so he knows everything you could want to know about Berlin. And at the lake, he tells her that across the lake, there's this estate where the Nazis decided in 1942 to start exterminating Jews in concentration camps. And she's like looking around at all these people enjoying a lovely day at the lake. And she just looks at him and goes, and you swim in this lake? And he goes, yeah, well, a lake is just a lake. And it's like a crack you can see in her narrative history of the Holocaust and what happened, and how it's always from this period of mourning and sadness. And then, but these kids, it's whatever year after the Holocaust, and it was just beautiful. And then I know, Kristen, you said like her going into the lake.
Yeah, so water is a really important part of Hasidic Judaism. I've got this really great book that we're going to be referring to a lot as we talk about this. That is a sociological study of women who, actually both genders, of people who left Hasidic Judaism and how and why and what that looks like. So, written by a scholar at the University of Kansas named Lynn David Mint. So we're going to be talking about this book a lot, but I'll read from it in a minute to explain what Yankee was doing when he first got out of bed. So with the water there.
Yes, thank you. Because I didn't even write that down, but I forgot, and I was like, well, I don't understand.
So water is a really important part of all three Abrahamic religions, for sure. In Christianity, we understand water as part of a rebirth. If you are somebody who was not born into Judaism and you convert to it, you are also baptized as part of a new life ceremony. Water is a lot about it. So the fact that one of her very first acts as a new person,
Mm-hmm.
was to baptize herself in this new life, in this lake that goes almost against everything she had been told about how the world works. And that she there chose to relieve herself of the most permanent sign of her ties to, and most permanent outward sign of her tie to Hasidic Judaism, which would be her wig. That she lets that kind of float away and lets it go, was incredibly powerful. And I love that shot that she's alone and it's just her and her wig floating in the water. And as much as I love like how it ends, I almost wish the episode would have ended there. Because like how it ends, there's nothing more powerful than that moment. But like, it's fine. I get it. Like we needed to see more of her connection to music and more of that. But that scene was something.
And it's, and even as the non-religious person of our pair, I recognize it as very similar to a lot of baptismal scenes I have seen.
Yeah.
And what I love about the way this show is shot is that it allowed you that space and allowed her that space for you to just kind of understand the symbolic importance of what was happening. And that they gave you that conversation with Robert about what the lake was. And you can see her kind of process of like, okay, but this is my new life. And this is me figuring out who I'm going to be now. And so I can go in this lake. And I can like cleanse myself of my past, which was just, was it powerful. And that girl is a stunning actress.
She's incredible. Is she a German actress? Do you know?
She is Israeli, I think.
Okay.
I looked it up and then I forgot. I'm going to look it up right now. But she's captivating. Like you cannot look away.
I can't take my eyes off her the minute she's on screen.
Yeah. Shira Haas is Israeli.
Wow.
And I don't, the actor who plays Yankee is also a relatively new actor, Amit Rahav, but I do not know where he is from.
There's an actress named Jane Levy who used to be on Suburgatory and is right now on like that playlist show on NBC. And the Esty reminds me a little bit of Jane Levy and like how her eyes sit and like how like it's a very similar ability. Yeah, it's just very, that's who I thought of. I was like, oh, it's like a very, very tiny Jane Levy.
She's so tiny. She's so tiny. Yeah. So we'll see what happens in part 4, but part 1 was such a beautiful introduction to both worlds, and like it almost plays like a thriller.
Oh, because it is in some ways, like
because as soon as you find out that Moishe and Yankee are gonna go try and find her, like it builds this tension, and you're like, oh, and you know the whole time she's trying to escape, and like that scene where the taxi is driving through Williamsburg, and
take the long way through Williamsburg, please.
Yeah, the long way through Williamsburg, and she is like paranoid that she's gonna not be able to get on this plane.
And that's what a lot of people in this book talk about, that when the process of their leaving, that it was, I mean, it's a really long mental journey to get there.
Yeah.
You know, she and the piano teacher probably talked about it for a year, if not more. You know, obviously there was the process of getting her citizenship and sending all of that in and saving up the money and some other things like that. But like, it's a divorce from yourself.
Yeah.
Because you can't really go back. Men like Moishe can kind of maybe straddle the line, but women are pretty much excommunicated. And so are you willing to give up, which is really fascinating because the most recent book I read for Abby Research Reads was also a story of excommunication and leaving a church. So, but before we get too far, I want to explain the water because I think it's really important.
Yes, please.
So I'm just going to read directly from this because it's easier than me trying to explain it and getting some of the words wrong. So, upon rising, Hasidic Jews may walk only 3 steps from their bed before they ritually rinse their hands in a prepared 2-handled bowl, an embodied ritual intended to sanctify each person in God's holiness every day. The foundation of this text is the biblical commandment that all Jews should therefore sanctify ourselves in his holiness, taking our hands with a vessel to carry out his duty and his service. And as they wash their hands every day, They then say a blessing to God, thanking him for returning their souls to them after sleep.
Wow.
After this ablution and going to the bathroom, they then recite a blessing, thanking God for keeping their bodily organs functioning smoothly. Blessings accompany most actions throughout the day. Bodily practices are essential in the creation, maintenance, and external display of Hasidic identity. These repeated daily bodily rituals continually work to establish and maintain their relationship with the divine.
Yeah. And I mean, that's really clear. If you just, like in the first part, if you just kind of take apart all the pieces that go into performing Hasidic Judaism, and all of these rituals that take place inside the house, with the body, on the body, and particularly like with the very different gender roles, which I thought, I hope they go into more as the show goes on. But it's a very, like, it strikes me too that, like, it's something that all of these social norms, all of these rituals are hyper policed by the community as well, and like surveilled. And there is this encouragement, like you are encouraged to report on people that are not adhering to the social norms or performing the rituals, or, you know, behaving as they ought to behave as a part of this. Which to me as an outsider looks very suffocating, but I know for a lot of people is a huge part of how they see themselves. And it's also one of those things, like, if this is what you're born into and you don't know anything else, it's all you know.
Yeah, and that's something that this is the same for anybody born into any community with certain expectations or rules. And so there are people that are quite happy to kind of go along with that, and they become very formed by that and continue to perform it. I think we see this with Yankee's mother, Mimi. She's very clearly finds it very important to maintain the community as it is. And then you have people like what I think of kind of as Esty's grandmother, who's probably in between.
Yeah.
Probably navigating like let's sin a little, but let's not sin a lot. And Yankee's the same way. It's a small sin. It's a small sin what I let her do with the piano lessons. It's not one of the big ones.
Yeah.
The problem is with really, really structured communities is a little sin is the first crack in the armor.
Yeah.
It's the first crack in the brick wall, and then it just keeps going, which is why the hyper policing is important, because you can't allow any cracks.
Yeah. And like, I can see where they would view his allowing her to continue to play the piano, would be seen as like the slippery slope, right? Well, then
For sure.
And then you did this, and because you didn't keep to the rules and traditions of women not being allowed to perform music, that is one of the reasons why she has now like broken with the community and left.
And what's really important for people who are outsiders to remember too is that because this is so tied up in theology and in God's opinion of you and in your relationship with a deity and and the tradition going back gajillion millennia, and you kind of see yourself in this very line, it's a lot harder to start the first steps of breaking and like, oh, this is crazy. Mm-hmm. Like, this is too much. This isn't how this has to work. Hope is hope and dissonance, like dissonance isn't allowed. And so questions aren't encouraged. And so it's just a different, I think these kind of communities, it's very easy for people to look at and say they're weird and crazy. Mm-hmm. And that's a really simple thing. And I was worried that Unorthodox would treat the Hasidic Jews like a commodity to be mocked.
Right.
And well, of course, everybody wants to leave. Like, look how terrible it is. It's not terrible for everyone. There are people that are quite content in this system. Yeah. The problem is, of course, anytime you keep someone in a system who is miserable in that system, that's when our kind of Western sensibilities are like, they should be allowed to leave.
Right.
And we struggle with that. We struggle with that with the Amish. We struggle with that with any group that excommunicates people. We get very judgy. Yeah. And so I don't think the show treats it like that. I think it treats it with a great deal of respect.
Yeah,
but I have not heard, I mean, we're not going to hear from any Orthodox people to hear if they see themselves represented, but I do know they've consulted with former Hasidic adherents, and So I'm sure they did their homework. It seems like they did their homework.
Yeah, that's one of the things in the making of documentary at the end that they talk about. And it's really, really beautiful, and you don't have to have watched all of the parts to watch it, because it doesn't spoil anything, I don't think. And they have the actor who actually plays Moishe, like, and Moishe's character who like left the community and then came back. The actor who plays him was a Satmar Hassidic who left his community.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, they talk about the process of like the Hasidic consultant that they brought on to help with the language and he's a Yiddish consultant, excuse me. But he also knows a lot about Hasidic Judaism, and so he helped with like a lot of the clothing and the ritual practice and everything. He knew this actor, and he said, "Oh, we should bring him in." And the actor was like, "This is my story. This is what I went through. This is my story." But he talks really specifically, I think, because we haven't yet talked about the fact that the majority of this show so far is in Yiddish.
Yeah, which I loved.
And the actor who plays Moishe talks about like the importance of having art in Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's one of the things that sets the Satmar Hasidic community apart from other Hasidic communities and other Jewish sects, is that Yiddish is their primary language. And that is not the case in all, as from what I understand, all ultra-Orthodox Jewish sects, or Jewish sects full stop. So that is one of the things, the markers that they have, as well as their theology kind of founded in Holocaust surviving.
And Yiddish, for anyone who doesn't know, is kind of a weird hybrid of English and Hebrew.
Yeah. That
has kind of created itself. It was a language specifically kind of created to be a secret communication. So. Yeah.
And I love that they were authentic in recognizing that. I was just watching a show last night where these two characters are Russian, both Russian, and in Moscow, and speaking to each other in English. And so like but like the fact that they had to have somebody come in and teach all of these people are not native Yiddish speakers, all of them. I think only the actor who plays Moishe. But he talked about specifically the importance of having art in Yiddish.
Yeah.
Especially removed from the religious context of it only being spoken within the community.
There was a production of Fiddler on the Roof last year that was done entirely in Yiddish.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So he talked about like we're starting to see more art in Yiddish, and it's really, really important part of the identity, and especially for people who find it problematic if they've left the religious community, like being able to celebrate Yiddish outside of the religious context. Yeah. But it's a remarkable thing for Netflix to do, I think, to put their stamp behind something that for a lot of people, like it's hard for a lot of people to watch things with subtitles, which is why, you know, one of the reasons why they don't do as well as English language movies. But it's just, I loved it.
I was so grateful. I didn't even notice it in a certain way, because if it had not been in Yiddish, I wouldn't have kept watching.
It would have been like, and like I didn't even think about it, but I think you're right. Like I would have thought it was really, really weird if they were speaking
English, yeah.
English the whole time, and they go back and forth, and obviously they're all fluent in English as well, but Yiddish is their primary language. Yeah. So
and there are some words that aren't Yiddish words. The word accident isn't in Yiddish.
Yeah, so like there's times where some of the words, which always makes me laugh, because like Irish is a really, really old language, but they've translated contemporary words like into Irish so that you can say them, as opposed to just in Yiddish. If they don't have the word for it, they don't.
Yeah.
Like helicopter in Irish is one of the ones that always gets me, because they've like added a couple fadas and like changed the letters around, and I'm like, we can just say helicopter. It doesn't have to be in Irish.
What's funny is I think a lot of us don't know that we're speaking different languages like that all the time. Like we do it in English. So like so I grew up in a part of the country, obviously, that has a lot of both adhering and not adherent Jews, and like Yiddish words are a big part of like life up here.
Yeah.
So like anytime my mom wants to call something kind of messy or like unkempt and kind of gross, she uses the word schmata, which is Yiddish for unkempt. And I didn't know that not everybody knew what schmata meant until I get to college. But like the word schmuck that we say, like somebody who's being an idiot, is like, that's Yiddish.
Yeah.
Anytime you say the phrase cul-de-sac, you're speaking French. Like we do it too.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
All the time, which I think is what's so fascinating about how humans do language. So, and before we get on to like a linguistic rant, which we both could do, we probably should hit pause here.
Yes. I think we're done for part 1, but as you can tell, we have a lot to say about the show, y'all.
So much. We really hope you watch it with us because we think it's not only is it rich for our personal intersections that we like to talk about in terms of academics, but we think it's a really rich human empathy building story about a part of the human experience that a lot of us will never experience outside of art. So that is a really important piece of it.
Yeah, and to have it done so authentically and respectfully. It's not a criticism of Satmar Hassidic Judaism. It's an exploration of it, and which is done with a great deal of empathy. So we look forward to talking to you next week about part 2. Be safe and be well. We're the good doctors, and we'll see you then.
Bye, guys.
Bye.